I have seen the dark universe yawning, where the black planets roll without aim.
When I was young, around 10 to 12 years old, me, my parents and my brother lived in a small 2-bedroom house. I stayed on a mattress in my parents' room, and my brother had his own room that would later become mine when he moved out. The thing about my brother's room that is a vital part of this is that the only access to the restroom in the house is through his room. So randomly in the middle of the night one night, I had a strong urge to go pee. So I got up after a bit and proceeded to walk towards my brother's room. I remember before I even got to his door, something inside my gut just felt odd, but I did not think much about it at the time. I'm at his door now, and I turn the doorknob. As the door opens, I see some type of being standing to the side of his bed with his back facing me. I remember seeing my brother asleep laying on his bed. I guess this being heard the door open, as the door makes noise being an old house. It turned around and made eye contact with me. The moment this being made eye contact, I was frozen in place. I remember trying to get my body to move. I was scared to death. All I wanted to do was scream and run away at that moment. I tried to move my fingers. I tried to say something, but was unable. A few seconds go by and everything goes black. I wake up very early that morning, laying in the doorway with both of my arms sore, and that is pretty much the end. Here's a short description of the being. This being will forever be burned into my memory, and I'll try my best to describe it. I was not that tall at the time, but this being was probably around 5'8" to 6 foot. It had some dark color robes on, which was the only clothing I remember. It had some writing on the bottom, but I did not get a clear enough look to remember any of it. The being's face almost had the texture of old leather, almost like a reptile. It was dirt brown in color. It had big black eyes and a head shaped like a human head. I encountered a grey as a kid, or at least that's what I can assume. I was somewhere around 9 years old. It was the middle of the night. I can't say what time specifically, but it was a clear summer night. So, at least past 9 p.m. There was a mini forest of sorts on my right that's long since chopped down and turned into an empty field. And on my left was the casino we were headed for, to reach the gas station in front of it. I was sitting there in the middle of the back seat when I got this weird feeling on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I turned around in my seat to look through the rear window, which was maybe 8 inches from me, and suddenly I was face to face with exactly what you imagine when you say alien, just a little paler. Its head was large and similar to an upside down squash in shape. Its skin was very light grey. Each eye was massive, pitch black and oval shaped. I couldn't see any nose, but I'm pretty sure it had a really small mouth, but I could be wrong. It had a very skinny upper body. I couldn't see the rest of its body, it was past the window, with small, bony shoulders and ridiculously long hands that I swear looked like they were just morphing through the window, like nothing was there, holding onto the back of the van. Maybe I saw that part wrong. Maybe it was the angle, as I was seated higher than it was standing. But my memory seems to insist that it was gripping straight through it, despite my instinct to say of course it wasn't. I'll never, ever forget looking into its eyes. It seemed to have no expression at all, but I could tell it was looking straight back into my eyes. I stared into the eyes of a creature I can't explain or prove the existence of. I was inches away from it. I might not have even noticed it if it weren't for the bright, close casino lights illuminating it. Note, somehow this thing was holding onto the back of a moving van. We couldn't have been going more than 15 miles per hour, around 24 kilometers per hour, at max, because there was a stoplight coming up soon. But still, how did it hold on? How long had it been there? I looked back at my family to ask if anyone else saw it, and by the time I looked back to the window, it was gone. None of my family saw it. It wasn't a hallucination or my mind in the dark. It was very bright around the casino anyway. It has hundreds upon hundreds of bright lights all over, and I wasn't tired or dehydrated. I pressed my back firmly into the seat, trying to pretend I didn't see what I saw. But the memory has stayed crystal clear, haunting my mind for well over a decade. I'm always hesitant to share this story because the creature is so predictable in its appearance. But personally, I think greys are the stereotype alien for a reason. It was late afternoon and I was probably around 10 at the time. I was on my way home from school football when I realized that an odd man was walking along my street. At first I stopped walking and examined the man for a moment. There was something about him that didn't sit right with me. The way he moved, the way he looked, the way he was looking at things in such definitive detail. I couldn't really put my finger on it. All I knew was that his presence made me feel very uncomfortable. I went and sat behind a car so he couldn't see me, and I waited for a few moments. As he walked onto someone's driveway, out of view, I ran back to my house, which was only a few doors down. It didn't take me long to reach my drive. However, the moment I stepped onto my driveway, I felt like I was being watched. I didn't want to look back. I rushed into my house to tell my mum and my grandparents what I had seen. Of course, they just brushed it off and made an excuse for it not to be some kind of alien-like man. I couldn't be bothered to stand around and try to convince them, so I went up to my room and stared. I stared out of my window for a while, and then there they were. My window looks out onto my driveway, so I could see him clearly. He was tall, maybe 6'5" or so, and extremely skinny. His neck was abnormally long, and his shoulders were narrow. He wore a white sports jersey and a pair of baggy jeans. The top of his head was large and veiny. Overall, he was a really weird-looking person. I bolted downstairs with the most intense adrenaline rush I'd ever had to tell my family. Out of breath, I stuttered out my words, and they walked on into the living room to take a look for themselves. My mum's face turned pale as she stared into the eyes of the person, who was now stood right up against the living room window, so close in fact that you could see the condensation from his breath on the glass. He slowly pulled up a notebook from his pocket and started writing. As this was happening, everything was quiet and everybody was frozen. It was the eeriest atmosphere I've ever experienced. A few seconds passed and he finished taking his notes, and he strolled back down the driveway, still pale. My mum turned to me with an expression of terror and complexion. The only thing we knew to do from here was to contact the police, which we did. However, they looked for this man all over the neighborhood and he couldn't be found. Overall, this experience has probably been one of the most bizarre and terrifying I've ever had. I'm hoping someone could help me to figure out what has actually happened here, or who or what this person was. I used to be very skeptical of the whole spiritual phenomenon, up until last year when I learned about my spiritual abilities. I was always raised to be a Christian, and whenever I found myself questioning the belief system, which was quite often, and assumed I knew no more than anyone else. Even so, After discovering my psychic abilities, I didn't necessarily believe in aliens, UFOs, or any of those shenanigans. But now, there's no doubt in my mind. This story actually takes place not too long ago, early October of this year, 2020, if anyone's reading this in the future. I was on a vacation to California with my mum, and we were going to visit one of her friends, who just so happens to be an empath. I was actually really excited because where I'm from, people like me aren't exactly common. I've never actually met someone outside of psychic shops who's seen what I had. And hearing what this lady has, I was bouncing on my heels in anticipation to meet her. I go to her house and we talk for a little while. Me being the introvert I am, I mostly just listen to their conversation in amusement and observe her aura so I can get a good sense of who she is as a person. I have trust issues, so I like to observe people. She soon offers we take a walk around her neighborhood, which I very quickly agree to. I put on my shoes and basically skip outside, because let me just tell you, it was absolutely beautiful. It was October 1st, so the moon was full, and contradictory to most psychics, my energy is actually restored in full moons, but most people talk about how their energy is drained on full moons. We're walking around having a nice time outside, and my senses are just completely expanded. My hearing is better, my eyesight is better, and I was actually a little freaked out, hearing all of those animals scurrying in the bushes who were oh so very obviously following us. It was very beautiful, secluded, literally no people, a delicate, gentle, cool breeze. I love winds, they're like a hug from the universe. Eventually, we have to go back to the house, and this is where shit starts to get weird. So my little psychic alarm sense starts going off, very faintly, like it was telling me something was there, but we weren't in danger. I'm a very anxious person, so I simply ignored it. But then I turned around and I saw a person walk by. It was very quick, very brief, and me being curious as I am, I started looking around the area where I saw the figure. My mum and her friend noticed this and asked me what I am doing. And I turned to them and say, "Who's your boyfriend?" Or, not that I'm assuming you two are a couple, just, who is that person? They both give me a creeped out look, and I feel enticed to explain. Well, I just saw someone walk by. He was very tall. And then I begin to remember the physical details about him and realized they weren't like a human's. He was maybe 5'10", maybe 6 feet tall. He was completely grey, almost like dolphin grey. He was naked. You could make out details, but it was nothing grotesque. He didn't have genitals or anything. Actually, he didn't have facial features or hair. I described this to them and they turned pale and start looking around the house to see if someone had broken in, but no one was there. My mum looked at me like I was crazy, nothing new. And I began to theorize that maybe the creature I saw was a demon, because the only time I've ever seen a spirit physically manifest itself into a thing on the physical plane, it was a demon. But the other empath explained to me that maybe I saw an alien. She explained it to me in a joking manner, but it all clicked and my intuition told me she was right. And I'm sure now that I saw an alien in her home. My only question is, why was it there? Last night I had a dream that reminded me of an experience I had about 8 years ago in Tucson, Arizona. I'm dropping it here under the guise of anonymity, and though I recognize how unbelievable it sounds, I'm 100% describing exactly what happened with no fabrications or embellishments. My girlfriend at the time lived way out in the boonies of West Tucson, and I lived in East Tucson. We were wrapping up our senior year of high school, so whenever I was going to sneak out to spend the night at my girlfriend's place, I would have to leave after my parents were asleep, and would sneak into her house after her parents were asleep. So this particular night, I drove out to come over before her parents were asleep. So she told me to drive around until it would be easier to sneak in. Now, when I say she lived out in the middle of nowhere, I mean it. She kept horses, so to have space for them, she lived way out past the city, kind of close to this place called the Desert Museum for anyone who might be familiar with the area. The point is, I was in the middle of the desert. The road that led to my girlfriend's house was really long and winded through the mountains. I would rarely see other cars on my way out there. So this particular night, I'm driving back and forth on this road, just waiting for the text that I was all clear to come over. I'm just listening to the eagles and driving around killing time. It's also important to note, at this point in my life, I was 100% sober. I very rarely drank, and I had never smoked weed or taken psychedelics or anything like that. This is where shit starts to get weird. I'm driving on this road and I look up in the sky to see what looks a lot like a super bright star moving in really erratic ways across the horizon. It would jerk and zip across huge distances in no time, and I couldn't see any flashing red or green lights on it, like there would be on a plane or a helicopter. It was super fucking weird. I pulled my phone out cause I wanted to throw it up on Snapchat to send to people to see if anyone could tell me what I was looking at, when suddenly the thing darts an unreal distance and is sitting in the sky damn near within a mile of me. I start pressing record on my phone when all of a sudden my car radio fizzles and my entire car just shuts off in the middle of the road. No headlights to see where I'm going or anything. My phone starts glitching and gets all distorted and shuts down. The glowing thing in the sky hovers for a moment, then totally disappears, leaving me in darkness with my car still coasting down the twisting and turning road. I yank the parking brake and just stop what I'm doing, with my heart slamming out of my chest like a fucking alarm clock when, out of nowhere, my car turns back on, the radio starts playing exactly where the song left off, and my phone turns back on the Snapchat homepage. I checked my phone and the video clip didn't save. I immediately started driving back towards my girlfriend's house and calling her and telling her I was coming over right now, which was fine because her parents were finally asleep. So I pull up to her place and leave my car parked by the stables. I say hey to the horses and start heading towards my girlfriend's bathroom door. She meets me there and I start frantically trying to explain what just happened to me, and my girlfriend looked at me like I was on crack. She laughed at me and told me to get inside, so I shook it off and did just that, because I still wanted to get laid. We end up laying on her couch. Not the smartest move for someone trying to sneak into her house, I know, but we end up kind of crashing there watching TV. My girlfriend's parents were on the older side, like maybe in their 60s, and her mum had some nerve disease that left her in constant excruciating pain, so she was on some pretty serious painkillers at the time. This woman was a true cowboy type and carried a Taurus judge on her hip at all times. For those of you that don't know what that is, it's basically a Magnum handgun that fires shotgun shells. I hear rustling coming from the parents' bedroom, and my girlfriend's mum comes slamming out through the living room. The family had 3 labs that were super great hunting dogs, and they were hot on her heels too. Mrs. C heads for the kitchen and starts looking out the windows. Throughout this whole thing, my girlfriend does not wake up, and thankfully her mum did not notice me on the couch since the lights were all off and everything. Mrs. C starts talking about how she saw the weirdest thing outside. She's either talking to herself or to my girlfriend, who was pretty unresponsive on top of me, but she sounds pretty manic. And I was pretty sure she was either sleepwalking or high as a fucking kite, so I didn't pay too much attention to it and just lay still and silent. She starts talking about how she sees these weird creatures outside, like flowers with long necks and one giant eye attached to the top. They look like aliens. I shit you not. I'm laying there like, wait a minute, what the fuck did she just say? So here I am, underneath my sleeping girlfriend on the couch, when the motion-censored light in the front yard beams on. The dogs erupt out the front door barking loudly, and the mum is walking around the kitchen like, oh no. And my girlfriend's still sleeping on top of me. I kinda tried to nudge her and wake her up, because at this point, I'm ready to go straight boogaloo mode and rip out the front and rip out the door towards my car. But she doesn't wake up. I just lay there while all this drama is unfolding that I can't see. Until after half an hour or so, the dogs come back, the light goes off, and Mrs. C heads back to her room, mumbling about how weird that was. I wake my girlfriend up and start freaking out, telling her what just happened, but she's still half asleep and not slightly entertaining my bullshit. And we end up moving to her bedroom and calling it a night. I left early the next morning before everyone woke up and headed back home. I tried to tell my ex about it again and the next day, but she just wrote it off as her mum being fucked up and that she was probably just hallucinating or something. So after that, I really just never brought it up again. I figured no one would believe me if she was right there the whole time and still wouldn't believe me. I might have told a couple of my close friends around a campfire or at a bar years later, but I largely kept that one to myself. I still have no idea what the fuck happened that night. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. If you liked that video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing if you haven't already. A huge thank you to all the Reddit users who allowed me to use their stories. A link to each story will be in the description below. If you have a story you'd like to share on my channel, please send it to my email, which is also in the description below. As always, thank you all so much for your continued support. I really do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.